My name is Wallace Banks. I was once married to a wonderful woman named Marion. We lived happily as husband and wife for 24 years or so, I thought. Turned out it was only 21 years. One day she decided to give it all up. Apparently she found a buddy named James Paxson, and they fell in love for 3 years. I'm a grown man. If that bitch didn't want to stay with me, then screw her. That hurt. God, it hurt. But shit happened. The betrayal really started to gnaw at me when I found out that my 3 children, Jason, Michael, and Macy, knew about the affair and their mother's plans to leave me. They didn't want to be at the center of things, so they left me in the dark and blind. In essence, they sided with their mother. Resentment can't even describe how I felt. But I bought a boat and set sail. I did some charter work from time to time, but mostly I bummed around. It went on like that for 7 years. Then, my daughter Macy called. Her mom needed a favor. She had a baby girl named Karen and wanted me to be tested to see if I would be a good fit for her kidneys. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see where this was going, and my sons, not believing in my mental capacity, came in and told me that, yes, my wife was pregnant and I was the father when she left. I was ashamed of them because they knew it too. What do you do when something like that is heaped on you? Me? I decided to take a trip to Bermuda. Next chapter. I was getting ready to set sail when Marion showed up. I had dropped anchor and was already sailing away from the pier when she ran up and jumped aboard. The boat was about 7 feet off the pier when I turned off the engines. I was about to throw her ass aboard when a little girl came up to the pier. She was calling for her mommy. I told Marion to get off my boat. Marion pulled out her handcuffs and fastened herself to the pier. Wallace, I know you hate me right now, but she needs your help. Karen is going to die without a kidney. Please don't hurt her because of what I did. I know you're angry, but you're a greater person than that. I stared at her for a moment, then laughed. You believe in me? A good man when you need something, but not good enough to stay with. Mommy! A child shouted from the dock. It's all right, honey, shouted Marion back. Mommy fixes everything. I felt a grim laugh rise from deep inside me, and I pressed the throttle of my boat again. Wallace, what are you doing? I'm sailing for Bermuda. I was planning to stop in St. Thomas first. Thanks for keeping me company. I see you're packing light. What about Karen? Who's that, Marion? I don't know any Karen. I've never met Karen. I've never held her bicycle or kissed her goodnight. She's your daughter. Funny, but I don't recognize her. Because I remember my kids, because I raised them. Not very well, of course, judging by how they turned out. I think I'll pass that on to you. What do you want? At that moment, we entered the channel and stepped out into the open sea. I saw that the girl had been joined by several people. Although I was too far away to get the details, I guessed it was my former family. I waved my hand. Wallace, you need to turn back. I turned on my Android and spent a few minutes downloading the voice recorder. Apparently, I hadn't bothered to read the instructions for such a useless feature, so it took a few minutes. While I was doing this, a conversation with Marion was going on in the background. Wallace, are you even listening to me? I think I finally turned the damn thing on. Not really. Could you repeat that, please? Wallace, we need to talk about saving Karen's life. Didn't you see her stagger to the end of the pier? Marion, unhook yourself and get off my boat. Granted, we were almost 2 miles from the pier at this point, but I was speaking conventionally. She only smiled at me. We can't do that. Jason has the only key, and he's at the dock. So you have a choice. Go back and help my daughter, or... I like the or. I didn't hesitate anymore now and opened the throttle to accelerate. Frankly, I was in a quandary. On the one hand, I really wanted the bitch off my boat. But I saw no need for the guilt and pressure from a bunch of unfaithful curses who had not only abandoned me, but basically cut me out of their lives completely. If I cut off her hand, I'd probably get in trouble, and it might stain my deck. Or I could chop off the mooring, which would damage my deck. I didn't really like either of those options, and I certainly didn't think she was worth $1,500 for a life raft. She kept talking to me, and I was still pondering how much my peace and quiet in a lifeboat was worth when my reverie was interrupted by the damn Coast Guard. Being a generally law-abiding person, I screamed. Needless to say, they had a cannon on their bow? They sent up a Zodiac raft packed with a bunch of unfunny guys in uniform. I put the androids in my little container in the deckhouse under some maps. They piled onto my ship without asking. What's going on here? The older one asked. Thank God you've arrived, said the bitch. He's kidnapping me. She rattled her handcuff at them. Sir, is this true? Well, I'm glad you're here too. If we can figure out a way to get her off my boat, you can take her with you. And no, I didn't kidnap her. Sir, it would be a lot easier if you just give us the keys and tell us what's going on. I don't have keys. This crazy bitch jumped on my boat and handcuffed herself to... I looked at the expressions on their faces and ran my explanation through my own lie detector. Without saying a word, I turned around and offered my wrists. Do you know how much the handcuffs burn when they're snapped on? Guys who join boarding school teams live for that shit, just like SWAT teams. I think one of them came in their BDUs. I was lucky they didn't plop me face down on the deck. As a kidnapper, I was a celebrity. I did, however, insist that they search me for my keys. However, my humiliation did not end there. That bastard, the senior assistant bosun, told one of the men to take a screwdriver and free the bitch by unscrewing the mooring from the deck. Why didn't I think of that? She sat back and smirked, looking at me. Now you have to go back. You'll regret it, said I. Not original, but I was feeling pretty shitty at that moment. There were a lot of questions, but I obeyed my lawyer and was taken into custody. The arraignment was going to follow pretty quickly when I got an expected visitor. Look, let's put all this behind us. Just donate your kidney and we can move on with our lives. You will do a wonderful, huge, and heroic thing. My daughter will be alive and well, maybe we can look at this as a bonding moment? I know, we've treated you pretty shitty. Maybe... Marion licked her lips and squeezed her husband's hand. Maybe we'll invite you over for Christmas? She glanced at him nervously. He nodded indulgently. It was nice to see that one of my goddamn organs was suddenly something less than persona non grata to me. How about this? We'll wait until my trial. Do you know how long that'll take? No judge on earth would make me give up my organ while I'm in custody. Have a good night. That's if I don't plead guilty to the lesser charge. I wonder if I'll get 7 years. They both blushed and started banging on the glass partition with a hammer as I turned and walked away. Next chapter. Oddly enough, the lawyer was found rather quickly. Hello, Mr. Banks. I'm Matthew Hughes. I'll be representing your interests. Oh, you're a public defender? No. Mr. and Mrs. Paxson are paying for my services. Yes, but are you my attorney or their attorney? You're raising a complicated issue. Not really. If you're my attorney, I need a notarized letter stating that you represent me. I also won't agree to your representation unless these assholes pay you a very large retainer. I'm not going to hire you and then quit because they suddenly don't want to fund the case. He pondered this for a very short time. That would work. It's a very awkward situation they've put me in, and it could easily solve the ethics issue. Why had I decided that the prospect of a large fee carried as much weight as his ethics? Cynical of me, I know. You'll see the papers tomorrow. The night before I was going to be released on bail, no, I didn't pay a dime, I sat in my cell and carefully considered who I was and what kind of person I wanted to be. Was I the kind of person who could callously walk away while someone was drowning? I didn't like to think so. But when it came to my family, former family, hate seemed to trump morality. In that respect, Marion was right. But at the same time, apparently my family was the kind of family that would abandon someone. I was drowning and they all left. Well, I didn't drown. I was still breathing. I could have found happiness. but for some reason I still lacked the ability to do so. And I know it was a weakness in my character. They would hit and beat me for doing the right thing, and I had no defense. Was a fairly harmless medical procedure worth my daughter's life? I quickly backed off. No, not my daughter. I was at best a cup of sperm purchased from a sperm bank as far as my association with her was concerned. Without much thought, I decided to somehow force her to interact. Technically, she was my blood. I could have insisted on visitation rights. But I quickly dismissed that idea. If I did find a judge who would agree to it, she'd still be living in this toxic environment and would resent me. What about taking her away from this nest of vipers? I could adopt her. Take her with me on a trip around the world. That would certainly be in her best interest. I began to think through the logistics. There was a tiny house next to the host. I could put away some of my memorabilia and I started thinking about life jackets, cooking for two, not being able to walk around in my underwear. What if she fell overboard? She was a curious girl, I was sure. What if I got distracted? What about school? Would I teach her? Would I be able to conduct my home studies from the boat? That would take up a lot of time that I was now happily spending on fishing and other activities. Then there was the prospect of friends. How would she be able to make friends on the boat? No, the boat would have to go. Then I'd be a goddamn single father with a girl ripped from my family. If someone had done that to me, I would have taken offense. I wasn't rich enough to be able to bribe her more effectively than the asshole Marion had married. Life on a ship would bore the little girl quickly. I sighed. I'd have to think about it some more. Next chapter. I was leaving with my lawyer when they ambushed me outside the federal detention center. Wallace, we need to talk. Mr. Hughes stepped away from me and back into the room. Talk? I'm supposed to be worried about a federal offense. I shouldn't be anywhere near you since I allegedly kidnapped you. The FBI is involved. You know it's in my file now. She blushed. Jason and Macy were by her side. Dad, I already told you that you gave up the right to call me Dad a long time ago. Okay. Mr. Banks. Karen's getting worse. She's on dialysis. You need to help her now, said Jason. I have to go to court. I'll have to pay taxes. I may even have to die. By the way, just so you know, I tore up my organ donor card and added an amendment to my will that I will be cremated without organ removal. Just in case. All three of us looked at each other in horror, but with guilt when I said this. People were as moral as they could ever be, but desperate times made them do desperate things. How could you think we'd do something like this? Asked Macy. History? You've already picked a side, and I know who you picked. Marion decided to put on her serious adult cap. Look, there's a lot of bad stuff between all of us. I've treated you badly. Do you understand? I'm sorry. That's it. I'll regret what I did until the day I die. But it's done. She didn't do anything to you. So we all need to act like adults and do what's best for Karen. You know, when someone usually says, let's act like adults, what they really mean is, please ignore all the shit I did to you. She opened her mouth, but I gestured for her to stop. Mr. Hughes returned with a couple of officers. Madam, I'm afraid I have to arrest you, one of the officers said. What? Why? She looked at me, at a loss for words. Wallace? What's going on? I believe the official charge is making a false statement to law enforcement. Maybe they'll let you see Karen once in a while. Mr. Hughes was instrumental in getting my evidence into the right hands. I needed to crack her cage. Jason started yelling at the officers, and it seemed like a fist fight could break out at any minute. Unfortunately, Macy managed to calm him down, while Mr. Hughes drove me back to the motel. Next chapter. I was lucky enough to meet them at the hospital. An attractive nurse was grooming me, which was quite pleasant considering the last 7 years. That damned mermaid still hadn't shown up. Thank you so much for your generosity, she purred. Macy and Marion just gawked at me. Then smiles appeared on both of their faces, and they rushed over to me. I backed up and quickly hid behind the nurse. Mrs. Paxson, Miss Banks, how are you? The nurse chirped. Mr. Banks, she paused. Mr. Banks has just put himself on the kidney registry. She looked questioningly at me and my daughter. Are you related, or is this just a coincidence? Yes. Macy answered at the same time I said, no. Macy's smile officially disappeared. The nurse blinked. Well, I'll just finish the paperwork, she said awkwardly and hurried away. You're making a magnanimous gesture, Marion murmured, not understanding the implication. She was a desperate mother, irrational. I'll make sure everyone knows what a big man you are. Macy whimpered. She caught the look on my face. Not really. Looks like moral blackmail is going to make me lose a kidney no matter what. If I don't want to be able to look in the mirror, so I have to save someone's life. And you can do it. You can do it. What makes you think it's going to be Karen? Said I bluntly. What? But you'll fit. I know you'll fit. Yes, but there may be others who absolutely don't fit. But why would you want to help the weird ones? She clamped her mouth shut and narrowed her eyes. Because strangers can be grateful. Strangers can be damn grateful to me for saving a loved one's life, and not consider it their due because of the time they've served. It would be poetic justice if my kidney was useful to some other girl. Personally, I'd prefer a father. A good, hard-working father with a family that appreciates his presence. I'd like to save a family like that. Macy closed her mouth and ran away. Why are you acting like this? When did you turn into an asshole? I thought I knew you. You know what? You cheated on me for 3 years, ambushed me with a divorce, turned my kids against me, and I just walked away. Sure, I was angry, but I left. And you dragged me back into your life. You keep making your problems my problems. You got me arrested. You gave up on me. You took me away from my daughter. And now you have nothing to say about who I am or who I have become. You want me to make it right? Fine. Have the Paxson clan show up the day after tomorrow at 8 a.m. sharp. That's it. Anybody goes missing, and I'm gone. Make sure you sign the papers so that if we make a deal, you won't have to wait for it to happen. I pulled an envelope out of my pocket. Macy has a doctor's appointment today. She needs to be there. It's a personal letter. What games are you? She began. You'll see the day after tomorrow. I turned and walked away. Next chapter. I sat at the conference table, my stomach rumbling. Mr. Hughes sat next to the notary. I thought about using the video camera, but changed my mind at the last minute after consulting with my lawyer. We learned from the district attorney that the charges against Marion and me were dropped, and we were warned not to involve the criminal justice system in our domestic problems, which struck me as odd since I was the victim here. Marion was put on notice. Their pathetic company entered. James Paxson, who was well past 40. Why he married my wife, I'll never know. Marion, that bitch. They sat together and held hands across from me. Mike came in. I'm surprised he hadn't been seconded somewhere. Maybe he was on emergency family leave. His hair was styled in a high updo, as befitted a naval aviator. Jason was there too. Last and belatedly, Macy walked in without looking at me. I want you to know right away that the doctors found not one, but 2 pairs for my kidney. There's one very good match, and one that's also pretty good. I lied. For a moment, I let it settle in my head. It really annoys them that I insist on controlling who gets my kidney. They think it should be a purely medical decision, but it's better that it gives someone else at least a good chance. Why are you such an underdog, Wallace? Said James Paxson. For one thing, you may call me Mr. Banks, and I have nothing to say to you now. You all want me to take a piece of myself out of me and give it to a stranger. You're trying to blackmail me into sacrificing myself. Well, you started it, and someone's going to get a kidney. But it doesn't have to be your little sister. So if you want to tell me to do the right thing and save a life, I'll do it. Since I've agreed I'm willing to sacrifice for a stranger, now it's your turn. Is this about money? Asked Paxson. Money? Just shut up and let the family... Oops, ex-family talk. I couldn't believe this guy. First of all, I want a divorce. At their display of distress, I raised my hand. I don't mean a divorce from that whore. I mean from the three of you. What do you mean divorce? Said Mike. Even though it's not legally finalized in any way, you've all been incredibly disappointing to me. You didn't call, you didn't write, you didn't do anything until you needed something again. Okay, I used to be able to live with that. But now you've disappointed me again, and I want out. The three of you have one last thing I want back. Huh? My name, it's Paxson now, said I, pointing to my ex-wife. I want all three of you to change your names to something else. Hughes started handing out forms. Frankly, I don't care what it is, although I suspect it will be Paxson. Jason, I think Arnold would be a great last name for you. Jason's middle name was Benedict. If it would help Karen get a kidney, I'd be happy to sign. Michael immediately started signing. You've turned into a real asshole, Pops. Since you're showing a willingness to sacrifice yourself, why don't we start with you? Would the rest of you mind leaving Michael and I alone? Embarrassed, they scurried out the door. Macy placed her hand sympathetically on Michael's shoulder. She had a premonition of what was about to happen. He looked at her confusedly. When they were all gone, he looked at me. You've always taught me to do the right thing. I guess they were just words to you. And considering how well my instructions seemed to be internalized, I was a bad teacher. It's a divorce. It happens. Sometimes bad shit happens, and you gotta deal with it, tough guy. Military service hadn't had the best effect on his character and demeanor. I'm glad you feel that way. Bad shit happens, and it can be caused by outsiders. It's good to know that those things are bypassed. Friends and family take care of each other. So how did you reconcile your attitude about teamwork in the military with what happened to me? Mom asked us not to. How nice. So if one officer asked you to do something immoral and wrong, you would agree. I opened my valise and pulled out a vial, a mirror, and a razor. Let's play Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I sprinkled a small piece of white powder on the mirror and cut it into lines. Here. And what do you think I'm supposed to do with this? I assume it's cocaine. Assume it is. That's the price you're paying for my kidney. He flipped the mirror over, spilling the contents onto the polished surface. Screw you. I'm not doing this. I don't believe you're going to let her die. You'd be surprised what I'm capable of these days, I said in a cold tone. And the blame lies with you. You see, I'm going to save a life. And you chose not to help your sister. And that's your right. It doesn't really surprise me, since I know what loyalty to family costs you. You see, she's not rich. She can't do anything for you. He looked like he wanted to pounce on me across the table. Screw you! I love my sister. But I'm not going to give up my career when I don't have to. Do you know how hard I worked to get to the rank of officer? Yes. A third of the time I spent keeping my family and marriage together. Cry me out of the river, tough guy. Just give her a kidney. Why are you making this so hard? Why are you trying to hurt us? I just stared at him. He looked at the table with the powder scattered across the countertop. You're funny, you know that? Here you are, the big bad fighter pilot. Have you ever thought about what that really means? It means you have to get in an airplane and put your life on the line for a bunch of strangers back home. You have to be willing to die at the beck and call of other people. No. I don't think that aspect of the job has occurred to you. You think only bad guys die. Because you can't even risk sacrificing yourself for someone you know personally. I think it's all about the uniform and picking up girls. Getting people to tell you you're great. Screw you. Mom was right to divorce you. Maybe, Maybe she wasn't. I'm going to save a life. And you, Mr. Big Bad Fighting Jock, now you have a tough decision to make. You thought it might be to shoot down an airliner. Maybe start a war. No. You're deciding if a little girl dies when you could have done something about it. No cheering crowds. No co-workers congratulating you or sympathizing with you. A simple act for someone other than yourself, you selfish prick. Except your family will know. They'll know you had a choice and you ducked it. Because you love your beautiful uniform more than your sister. Tell me about it. When you played with her when she was little, 2 years old, still developing speech. What did she call you? There was a flicker of concern in his eyes. Mickey. She called me Mickey. Give me your bloody poison. I'll do it. He gestured to the half-empty vial. No. I put on the coldest look I was capable of. You can lick it off the table now. Next chapter. Jason came in alone, as I'd asked, with an extremely wary expression on his face. He'd seen Michael as he left. Sit down, I commanded. You know, I'm most disappointed in you. You had a wife and kids when you did this to me. You should have known better if you loved them. I paused. You do love them, don't you? It was best not to take that for granted. Yes, he growled. So you guess how I felt? Or should have? Dad. In my opinion, Mr. Banks said, Mom was unhappy. She's been unhappy for years. I placed the envelope on the table and began to move it from hand to hand. His eyes followed this. So, were those the years she was having fun with James Paxson behind my back, or were those the years before that? Do you think she was letting me know she was unhappy? I knew she had been depressed and changed for months, but she never said anything about it. Don't you think you'd want Pamela to tell you if she was unhappy? Or let's say she didn't have the courage. Wouldn't you hope your children could warn you before you were in the dark? If your wife was seeing a man when you weren't home, wouldn't you want your boy to tell you about it? What do you want from me? An apology? I told you I'm sorry. I'm still sorry. Yes, you are sorry. Apologies are just words. I flicked the corner of the envelope with my finger, and it spiraled toward him, catching air from the breeze that came in. This is what I want from you. With a shudder, he opened the envelope. Inside was a key card with the Quality Inn logo on it. What is it? A hotel room, room 341. Inside lives a nice, attractive, disease-free girl who would like to meet you. In fact, I think you should meet her in the Gideon Bible sense. In fact, I insist on it. And what exactly would that accomplish? Why are you playing these silly games instead of just helping the people who stabbed me in the back? Once upon a time, there was a young man, married, and he had his father's marriage in his hands. It wasn't a perfect marriage, but it was one that his father valued. Like most marriages, it was a work in progress. We know how much the young man cared about this marriage, Karma called. Now it's my turn to cherish my marriage. If you love your sister, you will make sure she lives. Even if I turn out to be an indescribable asshole and send the video, he twitched, to Pamela, you can fix this. You can explain what an incredible pain in the ass I am. Maybe this won't be the end of your marriage, especially if you've built it on trust and honesty. Does she trust you? Does she believe what you say? You can fix it, but it won't be the same. Just like I'm not the same anymore. You should be having a lot of fun. Think of it as a belated birthday present. At the last minute, I remembered something. Oh, give me your cell phone. See, I just rented? Hired out is the term? Hired. Yeah, I only hired her for 3 hours. And just to cheer you up a little, since the charges against me have been dropped, I got my boat back. So, how much do you care about your sister's life? I leaned back in my chair and let him break out into curses. When he started to quiet down, I looked at my watch. You have 2 hours and 25 minutes left. Send Macy's over. And don't forget to leave your cell phone. Next chapter. Macy walked in with the look of a battered dog. Daddy, Mr. Banks, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I never put myself in your shoes. You were always the strong one, the one who disciplined us and took the hard blows. She almost sobbed at the words, at the drop of a hat. We thought you'd get over it quickly, and you seemed to do just that. You just started screaming, disappeared, and I assumed you hated us. You got that last part right. She wrinkled her nose. But I didn't think it would hurt. Not that much. It was, and it does. You know what's the worst part for me? The worst part of this whole situation. She shook her head. It's that you came back. You came back. Not because you were sorry. Not because you missed me. Not because you thought you were wrong. But because you had to. She sat back and looked at her hands. Is that why you made an appointment for me to see a doctor for an Escher implant? Escher is an irreversible sterilization procedure. 2 plugs were inserted into the fallopian tubes that caused scarring, ensuring that no eggs would enter the uterus. You took my future from me. That's not true, she whispered. Not technically. You took my future from me. I'm just taking the future from you. You're going to meet someone. You'll make love. You'll have a career, hobbies, joys, friends. Just no kids, she sobbed. No. Maybe you'll come to value family more. Maybe Karen will become your surrogate daughter. She sat silent, still not looking at me, watching her hands. That's what this is all about. The victim. Doctor. I went numb as she described the procedure. She said I needed a 3-day waiting period to make sure I was serious. The doctor said that I needed a family member or loved one to drive me home after the surgery. Now she was looking at me. Her face was devoid of all human emotion. Just a mask of features that once looked like my little girl. I have chosen you. Father, I want you to accept this cup from me, but let it be your will, not mine. Bitterness. Such bitterness. Next chapter. Marion met me at the front of the room after Macy came out like a zombie. Do you enjoy destroying your family? She asked venomously. I'm sorry. I was on a ship. I was sailing to Bermuda. I was physically kicked out of this family 7 years ago when every one of you took my side. So that justifies you using your own children horribly? They're not my children anymore. You made sure of that. I clearly didn't raise them well if they were able to do what they did to me. But I don't think they'll forget that lesson. They won't. Not one bit. Not one bit. So this is revenge? Call it whatever you want. I felt suddenly tired. It had been a terribly stressful day, and I knew it was only going to get worse before it got better. Do you mind? I'm tired. Being an asshole is pretty exhausting. And it really did. So, is it our turn now? She asked, looking at me even more intently. Sure. Why don't we get this over with? As if on cue, Jimmy walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He held one out to her and she blew on it, bestowing him with a smile that turned the knife in my gut. She had a whole life without me. Mr. Hughes walked in with the notary, too. He set aside his folders and sat down next to me. This was my presentation. Would you like to know the difference between you and me, Marion? She took a sip of her coffee. Do I have a soul? That's very nice. I see you still have your wit. No sense of shame, but you do have a soul. No. What I meant to say was that you have good memories. You made choices. You had children. Everything was just fine for you. For me, meanwhile, all of our old memories were in the shitter. I had to think about my relationship with all of you. You had Macy, Jason, and Michael supporting you, and I was thrown overboard. Wallace, how many times can I say I'm sorry? And the last few years of our marriage haven't left me with many happy memories. No, you kept all your happy memories for Jimmy. And you didn't bother to save a single happy moment for me. You went from one set of happy memories to another. I could see that James wanted to say something wise, but instead clenched his jaws. Maybe he was being clever. It doesn't it doesn't matter. I can see by the looks on our kids' faces that you want to do something horrible to me. So let's get to it, okay? I smiled, but the expression on my face wasn't reflected in my eyes. James, how's my wife doing? Is she fun to be with? He was silent, waiting. You want to know why everyone is attracted to married people? If someone is even slightly attractive, single people look at them fondly. James is an example of that. It's because married people have already wiped off all the rough edges. People are like rocks. You see, I've already nailed Marion, and you decided to take her, James. That's stealing. Stealing. You saw a beautiful thing, and you took it. You mean you want her back? Asked James, shocked. Oh no, it's like a stick of chewing gum. Once someone has used it, you don't want it back anymore. Why would I want an unfaithful and deceitful slut back? Marion paled slightly at my description, but said nothing. Perhaps you should keep that in mind for the future. I doubt she has 25 years left, but in 14 years or so, just a word of advice. Been there. Been there, done that. Are insults part of the package? He asked. No, they're free. But back to my question. You didn't just help my wife. You took my whole life. What I had. What I expected. The past, the present, the future. You changed my whole life, and you didn't even ask. I took 2 folders from Mr. Hughes. These are deeds of sale. One is for your house. You are transferring it to me. Hughes interrupted me. He drew them up in case you wanted to give him a gift. I smiled and nodded. And this one is a quitclaim deed to all of your property. What are possessions? Asked Marion. Hughes interjected. It's the contents of your house. You give him all the contents of your house, your boat and your cars. I continued. Your clothes, including the underwear you buy for your anniversary, a box of children's outfits, photo albums, trophies and diplomas, your grandmother Marion's cast iron skillet, your favorite book, the bed where you made sweet love, the backyard where you partied with all your friends, all of it. I want all of it. Here's how it works. You sign the contract, we do the paperwork, and you sit here and give me the keys to it all. The house will be watched by a private investigator who will be videotaping to make sure you don't sneak in and steal any of my stuff. I'm not heartless. I'll let you each pack 1 suitcase of clothes, including Karen's, and any legal documents you might need, birth certificates, passports, and the like. Just no marriage licenses. I have plans for that little document. So it's about money, snorted Paxson. Did I say anything about your 401 bank? Did I ask for your stock or cash? No. These are your memories. This is your life. You took my life. I'm taking yours. Marion kept a focused expression on her face while this interaction took place. Then she opened her purse and pulled out a pen. Where do I sign this? Hughes's assistant put down the sticky pointers, and she began to sign and date her name. Wait a minute, said James. He can't do that. You can't sell a kidney. It's illegal. It's not a sale. We're not promising anything. Hughes threw me a look full of disgust. I think lawyers take and value scumbag clients just so they can feel morally superior to someone sometimes. It's a simple request. No quid pro quo. Let's call it restitution for prior offenses. And if we report it to the police, he muttered. Don't be an idiot, Jim, said Marion. Then he won't be allowed to donate a kidney, or he'll end up in jail and Karen will die. We already tried that once. She threw me a look full of disgust. This time it's our turn at the barrel. The price is too high. We have to negotiate. I'm game. I interrupted Marion. What's the price for a little girl's life? Just curious. I tapped my finger on the file folders. But I know what my price is. Jim, sign the papers. I've owned this house for 15 years. It has everything I've worked my whole life for. It's a house. It's all we have. I know. And it hurts. It really hurts. All her birthday pictures. All her clothes. My clothes. My jewelry. She looked at me, reached around my neck, unclipped a gold chain, and poured it out onto the paper. Here! She started to remove the rings from her fingers. My rings, too. Do you want my wedding rings, too? I waved my hand languidly. No, thank you. I'm well aware of how much you appreciate such things. She even growled at me. He grabbed her head and turned her to face him. Marion, listen to me. He's just playing stupid games. He's not going to follow through. We can't be weak. He's just trying to tear us apart. Thank you, Mr. Obvious. But there's nothing we can do about it. We can wait. We can hope he'll come to his senses. We can see if we can find another couple. We can't drop everything because of one. You're not throwing everything away, I interrupted. You still have your health. You still have each other. You still have the lucrative job you used to induce my wife into adultery. Marion blushed shamefully and looked away. So everything will be fine. It's just that. Things will go missing. No deal, shouted James. You need to come up with another price. Marion, he's bluffing. He's bluffing. He yelled at me. Jim, he sailed for Bermuda. He's full of hate and malice. Jim, we can't risk our daughter like this. She's not, he began, but stopped. There was a pause. I don't know what you're trying to say, but don't say it. She spoke in a very precise tone, but her face was stricken. She turned to me with eyes full of hatred. I hope you're satisfied. I sighed. Yes and no. For years I told myself you were a soulless drifter who gave up everything for a few bucks and a young stud. But that meant that the woman I thought you were was a complete lie, and that I'd been a sucker for 24 years. That you were faking it. But, when you just picked up a pen and signed everything, it reminded me of the woman I married. The one who made the right choices and cared deeply for her family. My judgment wasn't wrong, so if a piece of that Marion survived, maybe I'm at least partly to blame. But only part of it. When it came to fighting, you didn't give me a chance to fight for my family. That doesn't change the fact that when you were offered the chance to get things, my voice was full of contempt. And family, you made the right choice. The only right choice. But, and you're going to have to live with this, it was a choice you denied me. I didn't want a house. I didn't want a car or half my retirement fund. I wanted my family, and I wasn't allowed to keep them because of you. I checked my watch. That was fun, and it sounds like you two have a lot to discuss. Unfortunately, your other daughter has an appointment, and now I have to drive her to it. Mr. Hughes can represent me in this matter. My work here was finished with those 2 words from James Paxson. Next chapter. It was a silent ride. I was going over this whole last encounter in my head. Marion wasn't a waste of time. She was willing to do hard things for her daughter. Was I a monster full of hate? Had I taken revenge, taught them a lesson, exercised my demons, or just indulged my sadism? As sad as it was to admit, there was plenty of room for all 4 theories. And only 2 of those motives were entirely complementary. On the way to the doctor's office, a text message popped up on my phone. Jason had paid his price. It also added that he was crying like a little bitch. I sighed and remembered my days after the divorce. He had 7 years of regrets before we were almost even. I hardened my heart. It was a typical OB/GYN doctor's office. It was filled with pregnancy magazines and pictures of mothers holding cherub babies. The walls were beautifully painted, and there were baby toys in one corner. Of course, there were pregnant women there. Macy's face stretched, and her eyes darted around the room looking for a safe place. Finally, she just closed her eyes and curled up. I could hear her muttering to herself, I'm doing this for Karen. I'm doing this for Karen. I'm doing this for Karen. Her knuckles turned white. Memories from the past I'd avoided for 7 years came flooding back to me. Macy loved dolls. She played with them until she was 13. As a teenager, She simply switched to artistic porcelain dolls. I remember her when she broke up with Gary Dodson. He seemed like a nice boy, but when I asked her about it, she said, "He doesn't like kids." I remember her smiling her daddy smile at me. It would be unbearable for her. "Macy Banks!" the receptionist shouted. She grabbed my arm, and I swear my bones rattled in her grip. Her voice was low and fast. Promise me you'll do what you promised. Swear to me that it will erase all the pain I have caused you. Tell me it's not for nothing. Make me believe it. I don't care what anyone else does. Swear to me. Swear to me that it's over. Please, just tell me I'm a good girl, Daddy." She broke down and burst into tears. While all of this was going on, the receptionist watched and then quickly picked up the phone. I was tearing up. I walked over and took her hand with both of mine. What is this?" a woman in a white robe shouted. She looked at me with a death-like face and at my daughter, who probably looked even worse. I was told she had already made that decision. I'm not going to operate on this woman, not in this condition. Until I get a report from the psychologist that she's okay, we're done. Of course. Send me the bill, said I in a hoarse voice, helping Macy up. "No!" yelled Macy. "You have to do it! My sister! You don't have to! You have to do it!" she said almost hysterically. "Santa," I pulled her towards the door while the doctor mumbled about safety. "Dad, it's not my fault. I'm so sorry. We can find another doctor. I swear I'll do it, but it might take me a little—" Shh. I was broken. "You know what the funny thing about sacrifice is?" I barely choked. "Sometimes all you have to do is just be willing to do the hard thing. You've paid in full." In the car, she finally stopped sobbing. "So now what?" she asked dejectedly. "Now I go to the hospital." There was no outburst of joy. There were no smiles, no joy. I don't think any of us had that much emotion left inside. No. Like an old woman, she reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of papers. "Here, these are name change forms. I filled them out and submitted them before coming to the doctor's office. I don't deserve to be your daughter, and frankly, I don't want to be your daughter right now." I absorbed this and couldn't blame her. To my eternal regret, I didn't get you out of the doctor's office before he denied us service. You have no reason to believe me, but I was wrong. "And yet we still have scars," she said. "Yes, scars. Marks for lessons learned. This is a second chance for you. When you have children, make sure you raise them right. Make sure they can't do to each other what we did to each other. Tabula rasa. Help your children to be better than us." We were on our way to the future. Next chapter. Epilogue. I sat in a cafe on St. Martin. The damned mermaid still hadn't shown her face, even after 10 years of searching. Nevertheless, I glanced around the French beach. There were consolation prizes. Across from me, an angry young man sat uninvited. "What can I do for you, son?" I asked softly. Softly, I asked. Softly, I asked. "I am not your son." No. I think back to my boys. Mostly good men, I suppose. Made some serious mistakes, but paid for them. Eventually, they realized what was important, which is all a body can do. "Would you like a drink?" "No. You're hard to find." He looked at me for a moment longer. Then his eyes began to study rather than follow me. "So, who's looking?" "My name is Harold Weiss." He didn't offer his hand and fell silent. I held mine out. "All right, Mr. Weiss. You obviously already know me, though I don't know where from. So how can I help you?" He didn't take my hand at first, but eventually shook it. "I need a favor. A big favor. And only you can grant it to me." "Mr. Weiss, I've never seen you before in my life. Perhaps you should tell me your story." He sighed and gestured for the waiter. He waited for his drink to be brought to him. This is too weird. I was expecting someone more. What? Hateful. Ah. Time and the incident with Karen had etched a fair amount of hate and bitterness out of me. He regrouped when I didn't continue. I married Macy Arnold. I'm sorry. You remember her as Macy Banks. I knew her both ways. She showed me the forms to change her name, though I never thought of her as Arnold. Macy disappeared after I donated a kidney. In fact, I donated it the same day I met with the family. Marion eventually got James to sign the forms, though judging by the look on their faces, it was a particularly brutal battle. Marion thought Macy left to do something harmful to herself. But I don't think so. I think she was solving a lot of problems. Yes, I lived in their house during my recovery. I was looked after by a nurse for the first 3 days, and I spent time peeking into other people's lives. They looked happy in the pictures, but I wasn't part of that life. As I got better, I started looking through their files. Any picture of Mr. and Mrs. Paxson went into their big fireplace. Any picture of Mr. or Mrs. Paxson and Karen went untouched. Any picture of a relative I didn't recognize, I destroyed. All of his trophies, diplomas, his toys, and her dress-up underwear turned to ashes and mangled metal. Looks like Mr. Paxson was a pretty good high school baseball player. I considered destroying all of her clothes as well, but 2 things stopped me. First, I remembered my mother. I remembered her church dress, her apron, and her guest suit. Those were important memories for me. In addition, there was a photograph at the bottom of the dresser. It depicted the 5 of us going to Disneyland when we were a happy family. I kept it in memory of my mom and for Karen's sake. The rest of the month was spent thinking about the future and drinking cases of wine and a special bottle of 25-year-old Laphroaig in a wooden case. Yep, it tasted like scotch. When I needed money, I would sell one of her pieces of jewelry. I certainly wasn't going to stock up on my funds. His clothes, both cars, the remaining jewelry, and some heirlooms I knew she treasured were donated to the National Kidney Foundation. I left the receipts on the kitchen table. It wasn't about the money. I decided I wasn't going to try to destroy a little girl I had nothing against but her relatives. I looked over at her swing and noticed a small gap in the bushes. There was a small tombstone with the name Frodo scratched on it, rocks and a withered flower lying around it. No. I was ready to burn the place to the ground if only Marion and James were here. It was the only gift I could give to a daughter I would never know. I called Hughes and asked him to redo the paperwork. Why did I wait a month? Well, I wanted them to bother setting up the new family, making deposits, buying furniture and appliances. Yes, it was a small thing at this point, but even though Macy and Marion had shown a sense of remorse more or less, I owed James something. And recovery is a slow process. Since Marion showed that she was still quite sensitive, I left her little notes. She's a lovely girl. I wish I had never known her, I wrote in their photo albums. I left a few more notes that she might have found over the years. But all in all, I was done with this family. Innovation. Sick in-laws, moving, fire. All of these things are stressors on a marriage. They got the equivalent of everything all at once. Let's see if good old James can keep the relationship going when it rains as easily as when the sun shines. I didn't wish him luck. But now this young man, whom I had never seen before, was asking me for a favor. Mace has been in treatment for a long time. Another glance. She's better now. She said you're the toughest son of a bitch on the planet. He waited in vain for me to comment. Anyway, when we started walking together, she wanted to make sure her husband understood sacrifice. He watched me again, but I didn't have a clue. I hadn't seen her in 3 years. She told me right away that any children we had would be named Banks. It was non-negotiable. So you have children? I asked, feeling a lump in my throat. Greta and Alois Banks. She gave me permission to name them. He's less than a year old. And where am I going with this? My brother died recently, and he had no children, though he was married. I want to continue the family name, but my wife refuses. I think you are the only person who can make her change her mind. You are my last hope. I pondered this while finishing my Caribbean lager. Could you give me your cell phone? He held it out to me. Just keep the number 1. Her cell is connected to this one. I looked at him approvingly. As it should be. I pressed the button. The connection took a while. Hey, sweetie. How are you? There was warmth and affection in that voice. She was glad to hear it. I remembered when anyone had ever felt that way about me. I tried to put some sternness in my voice, even though it was hard. Looks like you're still not learning your lessons very well. A sigh was heard in the receiver. Yes, Mr. Banks. What's all this about? What lesson? Where did you get that phone from? Her voice sounded stunned. The lesson was about sacrifice and grace. Your young man, your husband came to tell me everything he thinks about how badly I treated you. I think you have a fine young man. It took a lot of courage to risk so much for this. Family goes both ways. Would you consider giving him a title for his children? Her tone became forcibly light and carefree again. You know what? I think I'll keep it. There was silence. Was there anything else? Yes. Everything in my chest tightened and my voice became hoarse. I'm sorry, and I'd like to see my grandchildren. If you'll let me. There was a long silence that was only slightly less painful than the 7 years of purgatory I'd spent alone. I think Banks is quite an appropriate surname for a middle name. What do you think? Another pause followed, only slightly less tense. When can you come over? It was as if a weight I hadn't realized was suddenly lifted off my shoulders. Macy, after all, had learned about sacrifice and mercy. Everyone deserves a second chance. Even me. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.